gentlemen, Tony Chimmel here, the GOAT of ring announcers, and you're listening to the 601 Talk Group with your host, Richard Brown. Today is going to be a super show. Enjoy.
Welcome. Thank you for joining me. I'm sitting here with one half of the High Flyers, one half of the Killer Bees. He should be a WWE Hall of Famer, in my opinion, Jumpin' Jim Brunzell. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Richard. I was going to tell you this story about Wahoo McDaniel, great Indian wrestler of the 70s, 80s, and probably late 60s. And I remember we were in Sisseton, South Dakota, and it was an Indian reservation. We went there, and they made Wahoo an honorary chief, and they gave him a beautiful headdress. And we wrestled there. It was like a spot show, and then we drove up 29 to go to Winnipeg the next night. So Wahoo was very emotional, and he used to drink quite a bit. He had his own little pint, and he was drinking. And I'm driving. I had a 74 Catalina, four-door, and I had Rene Goulet in the back seat, and I was driving, and Wahoo was sitting in the passenger side, and it was snowing. It was snowing pretty good, and he said, "Come on, Jimmy." He says, "Pull over." And I said, "What for?" He says, "I want to drive." And I says, "Wahoo." He says, "Just let me drive. I drive in snow all the time." So he gets behind the wheel, and he drank what was ever in this pint. And Wahoo he used to take a lot of pills too. So we're driving down the road. He's going 80 miles an hour on 29 in a snowstorm. And all of a sudden he started slurring his words, and the car went into 360 mode. And we're going down the North Highway 29 doing 360s. Rene Goulet was scared to death. He jumped on the floor, and then it felt like at least a minute we were doing this. And all of a sudden the car laid, perpendicular to the road, and I slammed my foot on the brake and put the car in drive, and I jumped out of the car, and I opened the driver's side, and I said, "Chief," I said, "doggone it, you're going to kill us." And he was asleep. He was completely passed out. So Rene Goulet and I got him in the back seat. We drove the rest of the way to Winnipeg in the snowstorm. So we come through customs, and the customs guys were always, I always recognize this, and they said, "Who's that in the back seat?" And I said, "It's Chief Wahoo McDaniel." And this officer says, "Is he drunk?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Go ahead." So he let us go. And then the next day, Wahoo never remembered driving the car. So I thought, Jesus, and that was just one of the times that, happened that when we were on the road, oh my God, he was a character. He was a heck of a performer in the ring. And I'll never forget the time he had a long program with Billy Superstar Graham, and they used to have strap matches. And Billy Graham would come out of the ring, and he had these huge welts, and actually where he was even bleeding on his back. Oh, and he tracked down Wally Carbo, and he says, "Carbo," he says, "God dang it," he says, "tell that crazy Indian," he says, "that this is a work." He says, "He's killing me." But they made a lot of money for 6 months or a year. Yeah.
Did you have any strap matches over your career ever?
Oh, no. I stayed away from them. I was a baby face, sort of a athletic type guy. Didn't, no gimmicks at all, other than, when we put the masks on as Killer Bees in the WWE. But pretty straightforward.
Yeah. How did you get the name Jumpin' Jim Brunzell? I know you have what they call the best leg or
drop kick.
Drop kick, my goodness.
Yeah. Well, when I was in high school, Richard, I was a high jumper. I was state high jumper champion 2 times. And then I high jumped and lettered at the University of Minnesota. And I set an indoor record in high school of 6'4" and 1/4. And then when I was in college, I jumped 6'7" and 1/2. So I had like 37-inch vertical lift, which was pretty good. for a white guy. And they always say white guys can't jump, but I was the exception to that. So, and then it just made sense that Vern Gagne had said, hey, he says, you ought to be a hell of a drop kick. And I remember Vern used to put his hand, up like this, and he wanted me to hit it with both my feet. And I remember one time he had his hand over his head, and I hit it with both feet, and he says, holy Jesus. So, I was very fortunate that was one of the gifts that I, possessed. And it worked out good for me. So I've been called Jumpin' Jim ever since. Now instead of Jumpin' Jim, I said, just call me Crawlin', because I crawl a lot.
At least you're not on a walker full time.
I know it. Yeah. I've had 13 surgeries, Richard, since I've been out of wrestling, and I've had 6 on my knees, 3 on my shoulder, 1 on my elbow, 1 on my hip, and 2 hernias. So, and that was all wrestling related. I just wore my body out, and it's funny, this doctor, the couple of orthopedic surgeons, looked at my knees and they said, holy Jesus, Jim. So they say right now, don't do any weightlifting for your knees or legs, because your knees are shot, and I've had, like I say, 6 operations. I had my right one redone twice. So I do very little. I might do leg press with 50 pounds on the machine, and I'll do it, 3 sets of 30. And then my shoulders, I can only lift 20 pounds in each arm. So I don't do much, but I do what I can to keep my athletic looking young, but ex-athletic body that, looking fairly well.
At least you can move it still a little bit of elasticity, right? It keeps your flexibility kind of going. So that's
I just, Hillbilly Jim, a close friend of mine, and he wrestled in the WWE. He was like 6'9" and 320 pounds. He had cardiovascular disease from his parents that he inherited, and he had open heart surgery about 15 years ago. And he doesn't eat any meat. All he eats is vegetables, and he works out 6 hours a day for 6 days a week. And he hardly does any weightlifting. It's all push-ups, clean hangs, and he writes them all down. And I told him, I said, you got to write this book up and see what your workout is, because a lot of people that go crazy over it, and his heart, his cholesterol, everything's fine, and he doesn't drink or smoke. And he and I talk to each other probably twice a month. And he just tells me, he said, well, Jimmy, he says, I only had 1 day off every week last year. So he worked out 6 days a week for 52 weeks. That's determination. That's
more than most young people do, I would imagine.
Oh God, yeah. And he's 64 or 65.
Good for him. That's awesome, actually. Really good.
Yeah.
So let's go back to how you kind of first started into the business. I know you talked a little bit about training with Vern Gagne at the start, but can you kind of get into how you started up?
Greg and I were both freshman football players at the University of Minnesota, and Greg was a quarterback and I was a wide receiver. So we weren't scholarship, but we moved the ball quite a bit. We didn't have a freshman schedule. We played against the varsity every single day. They used to kill us and beat the crap out of us. And Greg was a good quarterback. He wasn't, Greg weighed about 170 pounds when he was in college, and he could throw the ball well. And at the University of Minnesota that time under Murray Warmath, if you were a quarterback and you didn't weigh 200 pounds, you weren't going to play, because the quarterback ran that veer option, that veer T, and he'd always wind up faking a fullback dive and then running the ball around the end. So Greg and I became good friends, and then Greg transferred to University of Wyoming because he knew he wasn't going to get a chance to play quarterback at Minnesota. So I stayed out at Minnesota, doing football and track. And then after my senior year, I played 1 year of semi-pro football in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, for the Manitowoc Chiefs. And then from there, I got a tryout with the free agent tryout with the Washington Redskins that spring in 72. And I went down there, and of course, they, matter of fact, the 72, they won that following season. They won the Super Bowl, and they only kept one guy out of this free agent camp, and his name was Herb Mulkey, and he was a all-pro punt returner and kickoff returner that year in 1972. He was the only guy that got invited back. And so I came back to the university, and I thought, well, I got 30 credits left. I'm going to get my degree. And then Greg called me, and he says, hey, my dad's going to have a wrestling camp, and he's got Ken Patera coming back from the Olympics, and he's got Ric Flair, who was a schoolboy champion in private schools in Wisconsin, and he's got Bob Bruggers, former Gopher great football player and NFL linebacker, and then he's got Khosrow Vaziri, who was the Iron Schnook, and he was wrestler out of Iran, and then Greg and myself. So we got this camp together, and Billy Robinson was the instructor, and for 6 weeks, and it was 6 days a week, and it was about 6 hours. So it was very comparable to what Hillbilly Jim did, but except that Billy Robinson was a little bit of a sadist, and he used to like to inflict a little pain as far as his submission hold. So we did that for 6 weeks, and honest to God, people, we were thinking, what the heck's going to go on here? And then finally, Vern says, well, he says, you guys have all passed, and here we're going to have, you guys are going to have, you're beginning in this profession, and it's up to you to do the best you can, stay in shape, keep your nose clean, and see what happens. So we started out, and then they sent me to Kansas City, and I wrestled every single day, twice a day, Richard. And they teamed me up. This was 1973 and 4. They teamed me up with Mike George from St. Joe, Missouri, and we won the Central States Tag Team Championship. And that was my first involvement in tag teams, and we had a real good team, geez. And we beat Roger Kirby and Lord Alfred Hayes for the Central belts. And I remember I was there for about a year, and I got to meet the Funk Brothers, and I got to meet let's see, who was it? Briscoe Brothers, and Jack Briscoe and Terry Funk, and watch those guys, and Dory Funk Jr. So I'd watch and I'd sort of try to pick apart and see what I could use in my repertoire. So it was a good learning experience for me. And then Vern brought me back, and wound up being partners with Greg for 4 years, and we did real well. And then I was sort of getting tired of being a tag team, so I thought, well, I'm going to see what I can do by myself. So I went to North Carolina in 1979, and that was the Mid-Atlantic, and I wrestled by myself down there, and was fortunate enough to be, included in some of the main events, and I was a Mid-Atlantic champion there, and had a couple feuds with Khosrow Vaziri, the Iron Sheik, Ray Stevens, and Ken Patera. So I was there for about 14, 15 months, and it was a good encounter for me, because even though we wrestled every night, but we were home every night. So you're going to have to stop me, otherwise this goes on. I can go right up until the present, but from there I went back to our AWA in 80 and 81, and Greg and I did real well, and wound up getting the AWA championship belts for 3 or 4 years, and that was good. And then finally, Hulk Hogan was there in 82, and was incredible. I mean, and I'm sure the people in Winnipeg remember him, and where you're from, Brantford. I mean, he was the golden goose. I mean, he opened up the AWA to, they were so used to stylish, athletic, sort of amateur wrestling type guys that, were good, but Hulk had that, he was a blonde, muscly guitar player, and he had a good rap, and he just got over. And that was it. I mean, people wanted him, left and right. And he set all sorts of records. And when he left the AWA and went to New York, that was it. I mean, that's when Vince took over all the territories and sucked out all the talent. So pretty soon, it was 83, 84, all the towns, and all the different territories were hurting because all their major stars were up in New York. So I remember going to Vern and saying, Vern, I said, and I had my own business. I had my Jumpin' Jim Brunzell gym then in White Bear Lake. And, I needed some money here and there to throw into it to keep it going. And I remember how bad the towns were. And I went to Vern and I said, Vern, I said, you've been very good to me and I've been good to you. And I said, I know, Greg and I mean a lot to this area and the AWA and we mean a lot to each other. And I said, I need to have a guaranteed contract by you for $95,000 a year. And he looked at me and he says, you're not worth it. He says, you can go to New York. And next week I was in New York. So, I went to New York and I didn't get along with Vince right away, but not, or ever. And it was a situation there that they put Brian and I together as the Killer Bees, and we did incredibly well with the mask gimmick and everything. And they said they were going to give us the belts and do this and do that, and they never did. And consequently, it was sort of, we were sort of stumbling and taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, and this went on for a couple, 2-3 years, and it just, and plus Vince, this is the truth, Richard. There, a lot of people don't realize. They think that maybe, if you're a professional wrestler, you wrestle Thursday, Friday, Saturday, maybe Sunday. When we were with the WWE for 3.5 years straight, we wrestled 27 times a month, every single month for 3.5 years. So you'd only have 3 days off a month. And, guys were getting hurt and guys were, having, different drug problems and alcohol problems. And it, they hated to be away from home, but that was their way of making a living. So it was hard. And actually the people that really thank for our careers are our wives, because they took care of the household. They brought up the kids. And my wife did my wife did an incredible job with both my kids. And, I'm so thankful and blessed to this day, because some guys didn't do that well and they had a lot of problems. And I put that at the, right on Vince McMahon's table.
True. I remember Brian Blair. I remember hearing something on an interview he did, and he was talking how at one time you guys did 60 shows in 60 days or something like that.
Yeah,
60 days was the longest you were gone for.
Yeah, I think it was either 52 or 62 days straight without a day off. And the one who had the record was Iron Sheik Khosrow. He did 93 days straight without a day off.
Holy crap. That's a long time. And then if you did have a day off, you're in an airport or you were traveling in a car somewhere to the next place. So it doesn't really count for a day off. Your body doesn't get much rest on an airplane.
No, but it was funny, Richard, because everybody used to train every single day. And that was part of their day. We'd get up at the motel. We get up, we have breakfast, go work out, come back, take a nap, and then go to the town, come back. And then usually guys go to the bar or have a 12-pack that they drink in the room or whatever. Get up the next morning, get on the plane, boom, get the rent-a-car, go to the motel, go to eat, go to the gym, take a nap, come back, go to the town, wrestle, go to the bar, and that's what our 24 hours was. Every single day.
When you were starting out with the AWA, what was kind of a typical week or a loop look like for AWA kind of throughout the year?
Well, see, Vern realized that, and this was, when we first started, in 1972 and 73, we drove every place. And, you used to usually work like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, maybe a Sunday in there. And because you needed time off, plus you were driving every place. And then Vern thought, well, I'm going to get an airplane. So he bought the 7-passenger airplane, which was, it's like, he created 7 alcoholics because you were so afraid of flying, because we had an old Air Force pilot, and he didn't care if it was 70-mile-an-hour winds or a thunderstorm. He could fly around it, I thought. But so it was real interesting. And then I'm sure that you had heard about the time that our Mad Dog Vachon was hammered in the back of the plane. He opened up the door, at 6. He opened up the door at 6,000 feet. And oh my God! And here's the problem: we were wrestling in Omaha, Nebraska that night, and Mad Dog came up to me and he says, "Jim," he says, "Do you have any uppers?" He says, "When I get home, I'm going to drive to Montreal. My son is in trouble. He's in jail. I have to get him out." And he says, "I'm going to drive as soon as I get off the plane and go to Montreal." So everybody used to have, Dexedrine, which is amphetamines, speed to take, because we drove so very much. So I gave him 2 of these, and I said, Mad Dog, I says, you take one as soon as you get off the plane, that'll get you to Montreal. And then I said, when you drive back, take the other one. So he said, okay. So little did I know, he's drinking a pint of Southern Comfort in the locker room, and he took both the pills. And then he was on the plane, and he was real agitated, and moving around. So Adrian Adonis gave him a sedative, a Quaalude. So he really went out of control. And that's when he opened up the door when they were trying to land. He said, "Oh, it looks so peaceful out there." So Vern Gagne called me. I didn't fly the plane because I was afraid to death of it. So I flew commercial on the way home the next day. So I get a call from the wrestling office, and Vern wants to talk to me. So I go into the office, and he says, "Hey, do you know what happened last night?" And I said, "No." And he says, "Mad Dog opened the door at 6,000 feet of the plane." And I said, "Oh, geez." And he said, "It was your fault." And I said, "Why was it my fault?" He says, "Because you gave him the pills." I said, "Wait a minute." I said, I explained to Vern what the problem was and what Mad Dog had asked me about. And consequently, thank God the plane didn't go down. But Mad Dog never flew on the plane again. They wouldn't let him.
What was the reason that he went for the door? Like what provoked him?
He just got out of it, and he thought it would be peaceful. So he opened the door, and he threw his bag out, and he put one foot on the step, and as soon as he opened the door, the pilot pulled back the airspeed. So the planes just sort of hovered, I guess. And then, they were getting close to landing. And it was a miracle the door didn't fly off and hit the damn tail and kill everybody.
My goodness, that's very lucky. You're probably smart.
Yes.
You're probably smart to fly commercial. That's for.
I was.
So you started with AWA. You teamed up with Greg Gagne. You did. You guys won the titles a couple times.
Yep.
8 tag team titles. What were some of your favorite highlights of working with Greg with the AWA?
Well, I'll say this about the AWA, Richard, is during that, I couldn't have been, if you were going to be in professional wrestling as a rookie, you couldn't ask for a better territory because we had the greatest talent, period, in wrestling. We had 12 to 14 guys, Nick Bockwinkle, Bobby Heenan, Mad Dog Vachon, Wahoo McDaniel, Billy Graham, Superstar, Billy Robinson. There were so many guys to learn from every single night. And, Les Wolf. And it was just, Don Morocco. There was so many guys, and you'd watch their matches, and they'd help you, and then you watch their match, and then they would, watch your match and just say, hey, this, you keep your head up a little bit, and don't rush and this and that. So they, sort of helped you, and it worked out great. It worked out great for all of us. Plus, at the same time, Vern realized that being in the Midwest, being in Minnesota, being close to Canada, the winters were so strong that people are cooped up all winter long. So he realized that when spring and summer came, people don't want to go inside to watch wrestling. So he gave the guys time off, which was great. Best territory by far to work in.
And in the summer times, you would only do would you have the whole summer off, or you do like 1 or 2 shows to fill?
Oh, we do about 3 shows a week.
Okay.
3 or 4 shows a week. And it was usually, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or, Friday, Saturday, Monday, something like that. It was, and they were all big towns. Occasionally you'd get a spot show, but most of the time, they were all big towns.
Big crowd. What did you do? Any carnivals outdoor carnivals with AWA, or was it pretty all arena?
Yeah, mostly all arenas. We did a couple state fairs, but Vern stayed away from the state fairs, even though they had big crowds. And, I think WWE did a couple of outdoor shows. I remember one we did in Toronto, and it was called A Big Event. We had 70,000 people there. Oh. And the main event was Paul Orndorff against Hulk Hogan. And it was, matter of fact, if you go in my book, if you open up the first page, you'll see a dropkick picture. That was on the front cover of the Toronto Sun that Sunday morning. And it was a great dropkick picture of me dropkicking Dory Funk. Yes, that's it. And I almost fell out of I looked for every doggone newspaper. I was stealing them off the motel floor to take them home, because I thought, and then the photographer who took the picture, he wasn't going to give me a print. He said, "Why can't?" And I said, "Why not?" I said, "I'm not going to sell it. I'm going to keep the picture." And it took me about 6 weeks, but I got the picture from the guy, who was nice. So, but yeah, otherwise, it was strictly indoors.
And you guys would come up to Winnipeg once every 6 weeks or so to wrestle at the arena, or once every 4 weeks?
Yeah, once every 4 weeks. And I tell you, Winnipeg was a great time. I mean, all the AWA towns, but Denver, Winnipeg, Milwaukee, Green Bay, Chicago, Omaha, St. Paul, Minneapolis, they were all, they come close to selling out every single night. And I remember I had one of the best matches of my career in Winnipeg. I wrestled Nick Bockwinkle to an hour draw. And I think it was 1981 or 82. And honest to God, my tongue, I was so tired, my tongue looked like it was a tie. I mean, I was out so far. And I remember coming in off the match. And I mean, that Bockwinkle was incredible to work with. He was so giving and just wanted to have a good match. And I remember walking into the babyface room, and Mad Dog looked at me and he said, "Jim," he said, "damn good match." So I thought if he said that was, so I was and actually you can still see that match on YouTube right now. If you go to Nick Bockwinkle and Jumpin' Jim from Winnipeg, boom, it'll be there. Sort of cool. Yeah.
I gotta check it out. I haven't actually seen it. So
well, if you got a spare hour, Richard, you can sit and watch it.
Where would you stay up here? Would it be the Polo Park Inn?
Polo Park Inn, my God. And then we used to go to High Steak Loft, one of the fine, I don't know if it's still there. I think I asked a couple people, there. Maybe it was, that was, oh gosh. Greg and I used to get rack of lamb there, and they'd also make Cherry's Jubilee for us as dessert, and I'll never forget one time. And then also, this is the truth, they had a bottle of French rosé wine. It was called Royal Dunaville. And you only could get it in Canada and in Winnipeg. And I remember they did a record crowd, and I think it was with Andre. It might have been a Battle Royal in Winnipeg. And they had a huge house. So there was about 12 guys that went to dinners at High Steak Loft. And Vern says, we're going to buy, he said, I'm going to buy dinner for everybody. So Andre was there, and Andre, had a huge appetite for wine. They went through 23 bottles of Royal Dunaville. They completely drank every bottle in the restaurant. And it was like $25 a bottle, but and it was good. And Andre, people didn't realize that, but Andre, before every match, he'd drink 3 bottles of Merlot. 3. I'd sit and watch, drink it like water, and then he'd play cribbage with somebody, and he'd have his tights down to his ankles, and they'd come in and they'd say, "Okay, Andre, main event," and he'd stand up, he'd pull his tights on and put it up, and then he hit himself, and he says, "I'm ready." He never stretched or nothing. He'd walk out into the ring, and do his thing, and people, it was hard to be a Giant. And I remember we went to couple places, and it wasn't in highs, but I remember we went to a place in Duluth. It was called the Chinese Lantern, and it was a big show, and we had a real nice deal, and we stayed and had dinner at this one Greek restaurant. So we all ordered prime rib. So the waiter comes and he gives Andre a piece of prime rib that was about that big and about that thick, and it had to be 2 pounds. And he gave the rest of us a normal sized piece of prime rib, and Andre gave him he says, "I want the same size as Jim and Greg." So he turned it away because he appreciated things, but the fact that people went out of their way to acknowledge that he was a Giant, and it was hard being a Giant for him. And I remember, and this is the truth, he used to fly first class, and he'd buy 2 tickets, because he needed 2 seats.
Yeah.
And we used to have these Halliburton bags, Richard, that were metal bags that the guys used to and they were expensive. They were like $200, but your stuff was safe and it wasn't going to be able to be broken into, and you couldn't cut it or anything. And Andre would sit up in first class, and he'd have this Halliburton bag, and he had a big bumper sticker on the Halliburton bag, and he'd hold the bag like this as he'd walk off the plane, and the bumper sticker said, "Don't get too close or I'll fart." And he'd hold it as he walked out the plane, and these people would look at it, and then they, their smile went to a frown, and that's the way he was, he was a character. God bless him.
I heard his farts were horrendous.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he could play a couple tunes, that's for sure.
You got a couple good Andre stories about traveling with him, right? Yeah, I've heard you talk about traveling. Getting stopped.
Well, yeah, I remember Wally Carbo, who was Vern's partner in St. Paul. We had a booking in Peoria, Illinois, and then we had one the next day in Moline, and Andre had to be in Moline early because they were going to do a big TV show about him. So we wrestled in Peoria, get on the road, and Andre stopped at a liquor store and got a 12-pack of beer. So and I got a big Cadillac, and he's sitting in the front seat, and he's pulled the seats all the way back. So I got a big bottle of Pepsi, so we're driving down the road, and he had flown in a girlfriend from Montreal into Moline. So she was there waiting for him. So he was real excited and anxious to get there. So he kept on saying, "Jimmy, go faster, go faster." So I'm going down the road, and all of a sudden I see this, and the cop comes down the other side of the freeway, comes across the center area, and he pulls up behind me. So I pull over. So he comes up to the door, and he says, "You know why I stopped you?" And I said, "Sir," I said, "was I speeding?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well," I said, "this gentleman here I got to get him to Moline because he's got to get a flight back to New York." That's what I told the cop. So the cop says, "Well," he says, "I'm going to have to write you a ticket for speeding." And I said, "Oh, geez." So he sees Andre, and he's got a bag in between his leg. So the cop says, "What do you have in between your leg there?" And Andre said, "Beer." And the cop says, "What?" And Andre says, "Beer." So the cop says, "Get out of the car." So Andre gets out of the car, and gosh, the officer, the patrolman, take 2 steps backwards. And I didn't realize how tall So Andre's got that big afro and he stands out there. And so we had only gone 6 or 7 miles since we stopped at the liquor store. And Andre was on his 7th can of beer. He'd drink them just like this. He'd just go, and that was one. And he goes, yeah, he just drink it all down. And so the cop says, he says to me, he says, have you been drinking? And I said, no. He says, well, he says, there's 7 cans gone here out of the 12. And Andre says, I drank them. And he said, what? He says, yeah. So he drank 7 cans in probably 10, maybe 12 miles. So he says, well, he says, the cop says, I'm not going to give you an open bottle, but he says, we're going to put the rest of the beer in the trunk. He said, I'm giving you a speeding ticket for a 65 and a 55. So I don't know, it's $75 or something. So we get in the car and I think, oh, geez, so we're driving down. But I was so glad that he didn't get me for open bottle, because they would have arrested us then. So, and he never would have got to Moline. So we're driving down the road about 45 miles. We got, 20 miles left to go to Moline. And all of a sudden Andre says, Jimmy, pull over. And I thought he had to go to the bathroom or something. I said, you got to go to the bathroom? He says, no. He said, I want the rest of the beer. So we stopped and got the beer, and everything worked out okay. But it was, it's hard to be a Giant, and he was such a good guy and a good-hearted person, and he and I got along real well. And I saw him in every place in New York and in Atlanta and also in Charlotte and then Minneapolis lots of times. And he, in Battle Royals, he used to pick me up, and there's a picture of it in the book. He used to pick me up underneath the arms and then pull me up, and then I drop kicked the guys out. And that was one of our moves, at the end of the match. And it was pretty good. And I remember, a couple times it was he and I, the last 2 guys. And I thought, oh boy, I'm going to get airborne here, He's going to throw me about 8 feet in the air. But he never did. He just, you and I together.
Did you ever get a chance to drop kick him? Did you ever get to the top of
No.
Is it? No.
But I think I probably could. I think I probably could have got him right smack in the jaw.
I was trying to see if I could find a picture real quick of you and him. But
I think it's, you see it?
There. That's kind of the...
Oh yeah, there it is, right there. Where he's got me in the waist lock, and he picked me up, and I drop kick, and people go crazy.
So you what about Mr. Perfect? Did you wrestle much with him with the AWA, or was he kind of?
You know what? He came in. Kurt came into the WWE, and he was just an enormous talent. He could do anything, and he was good looking, well built, and matter of fact, I worked with him a number of times in the WWE, and we'd have good matches. And he had a lot of ability. And I remember Bobby Heening telling me, he says, Brunzell, I think Kurt's the best heel in the business now. And I thought he's pretty doggone close, because he could do anything and he could talk. He had a good rap, and it's just too bad that, him and his friends, they had substance abuse, and you just couldn't tell them, you try to tell these guys, you can't mix this and you can't mix that. And they did. And consequently, a lot of them died way too young. Holy jeez, there was a string of them that, died of overdoses. And I was just sick when I heard that Kurt died. Just, it's horrible.
He didn't come to the AWA until after you left, is that?
No, he started in the AWA, and then he had a knee injury, and then he went to Oregon. So I didn't see him. Then he came back to the AWA while I was in New York, and they were actually going to give him the belt in the AWA, and then they didn't. And then he came to New York, and he did really well in New York. Yeah. He was really good.
That's one of my favorite matches, was him and Bret the Hitman Hart, probably.
Oh God, yeah, that was, yeah. Bret, I had a few good matches with him. Matter of fact, there's one on YouTube of he and I in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And we had I think it was a 30-minute match too. And Bret was Bret was exceptional. You know, his partner, Jim Neidhart, was like a nightmare, but you never know what he'd do. You know, he was very frightened of a drop kick. You know, my drop kick, I said, Jim, for God's sakes, I said, just put your hand right up by your chin. At the worst, you'll be able to shield yourself. Well, I don't, you know, he looked at me and he said, I don't like that drop kick, you know. So I remember one time I was working with him and I called, I said, I'm going to hit you with a drop kick. So I threw him in and I jumped up and he pulled back to the point where he fell backwards and I missed him completely. So I shot my legs out, my feet out, and he fell down and my boots came down and hit him right here and opened his cheek up for about, I don't know, about 10 stitches. And he saw he was bleeding and he thought I did it on purpose. So I get up and I go to grab him, but, you know, to continue the comeback. And he put his fist through my right side and I thought he ruptured my liver. I could not talk. I couldn't talk. I just no air at all. So I screamed for Bret Hart. I said, Bret, get in here. So that was it. And then after the match, you know, Jimmy says, geez, I'm sorry, you know. And I said, hey, yeah. I said, I hope you are. I said, it was your fault that you got hit in the face with the damn heels of my boot because you pulled out of the way. Oh, I'm sorry. You know, so yeah, they were a great team, but he was impossible to work with.
What were some of your matches with in WWF that were on your list that you would say were some of your best matches you had as a singles competitor and
oh gosh, well, Nick Bockwinkle, Bobby Orton Jr., who I consider one of the greatest. He was incredible and is his son right now, you know, for the WWE. But I had some Bret Hart. Greg and I had a great match with Tito and Rick Martel. Brian Blair and I had great matches with, British Bulldogs in Montreal. Had a hell of a match, 30-minute draw. And, you know, there was a lot of different guys. Nick Bockwinkle, trying to think of, I had 3-hour draws with Harley Race, and I had 3-hour draws with Ric Flair. And I remember and Cosro, I had a couple-hour draws with him, and that was a nightmare. Holy Jesus. I remember having to do an hour draw with him. And listen to this now. This, you know, you talk about bookers, and bookers give you the finish for a match and everything. So Cosro had beaten me 2 weeks earlier on TV with a loaded boot. He had that curly-toe boot, and he used to, you know, kick it on the mat, and then, you know, you'd come running at him, and he'd kick you in the Adam's apple, and down you go, he'd cover you. So he beat me for the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship on TV in Charlotte. So about a week later, I wound up wrestling him on TV, wound up putting a sleeper on him, put him out, and I took his boot off. And I grabbed the boot, and I went to the microphone, and I said, hey, I said, I'm going to get my championship belt back. I'll be regain my Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship belt. So we're wrestling in Roanoke, Virginia, and we had another shot that night. It was on Sunday in Charlotte. So I get to the arena, and it starts at 2:30, and it's 1:30, and I come in, and Sandy Scott with George Scott's brother, and George Scott was the booker in Charlotte and also the booker in New York when I went up there in WWE. But so I come in and I said to Sandy, I says, what's the finish? And Sandy says, George didn't tell you what the finish was? And I said, no. And he says, well, he wants you to go an hour through. And I said, what? I said, an hour through? I said, I'm the baby face. He beat me using his gimmick boot. Now I've got his gimmick boot, and my babyface ability, along with his boot, can't beat him in an hour. I said, you might as well bury me right in the middle of the ring. And Sandy says, well, that's what George wants. So we had an hour match. Oh, my goodness. It was like pulling teeth without Novocaine. He was so hard to work with, honest to God. And he was nervous beyond. And then we we wound up doing 45 minutes. And we both got counted out in Charlotte that night. So about 2 days later, they book us in a small town, and I can't think, Fredericksburg or something like that, North Carolina. And it was an Indian reservation, and they had a good crowd there. And they wanted Cosro and I to do an hour draw at a spot show. So we get into the match. We having a good match, bing, 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 going, getting holes and everything. And all of a sudden, Cosro, I knock him outside with something, and boom, he's oh, Jim, I hurt my back. So I said, is your back hurting? He says, yeah. So we took a double count out. We both got counted out, the belt in exchange. So the next day I get a call in the morning from the wrestling office, and they said, George wants to talk to you. So I go to in Charlotte into the wrestling office, and I knock on George's door, and he says, Jimmy, he says, I got to talk to you. And I said, what about? And he says, the match last night in Fredericksburg or whatever it was. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, he said, I wanted you to go an hour. And I said, Cosro hurt his back. And he told me, and he says, no, I didn't. He says, you said you told him to do a double count out. I said, George, that's not true. And he says, well, I can't let that get by. He says, you're fired. So he fired me. So it was sort of a relief because I wanted to leave Charlotte at that time. And it was just, it was funny because it wasn't funny because I remember Cosro, I had one of my worst matches with him. And then I also, he split me open from what town was it? It was in Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. We had a match and he got disqualified. And at the end, I made a comeback and he stopped me and he had this rope around my neck and he choked me to the point where I was almost unconscious. I could barely stand up. He throws me through the ropes and I hit with my head on the cement, boom, and I hit and it split this eyebrow completely. And I was bleeding like a son of a gun. And he says, you should have grabbed onto the rope to break your fall. I didn't even talk to him. So I had 29 stitches, and I thought, here I had my worst match with him. I had 2-hour draws with him, and he gets me fired in Charlotte, and then he roughs me up for 29 stitches, all with the same guy. And God rest his soul, his anniversary was the 20th of March. It was 4 years he's passed away.
No.
God rest his soul, or Allah rest his soul.
There you go. I've heard that's a good story. I like that. That's one of the. You said it was a blessing in disguise that you got fired from there, anyways, right?
Oh, it was horrible. Well, we wrestled every single day, and twice on Saturday and twice on Sunday, and everybody was in great shape, but you had no home life.
Right.
You had to leave. You had to leave your house at 2 o'clock every single day.
And the pay wasn't the greatest either, right? Compared to
the pay was good. I was right up there, close to $100,000, but you earned every penny of it. You know, I mean, when you figure that you're wrestling, 320 some days or 330 days a year, jeez.
That's doesn't give you much time for anything else.
No, it didn't. You got a lot of naps in, and I remember my kids were really young. They were like 3 and 1, and we had a daycare provider that watched them during the morning. So Mary and I do our shopping and stuff like that. But, we never had any time to, do stuff together. We went to the beach in South Carolina 2 days because we wrestled in that area. And we wound up staying there. It was sort of nice.
What was your time like with WWF? I guess you talked a little bit on how you got there. You said that you asked for more money or guaranteed contract, and Vern said that you're not worth it, and so you went up to New York. What was your time like, kind of starting there and everything else?
They had so many talent. They had 60 guys there, Richard. They ran 3 towns a night, every single night, with 20 guys in each town. And George Scott was a booker. So he figured, well, I got 60 guys here, twice as many as I normally would in any other territory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep them happy because I'm going to keep them busy. So he'd book you every single day, and like I say, 27 days a month for 3.5 years. And, the matches weren't that hard, but it was, the territory was pretty big. So you'd have to fly here and you fly there. And then pretty soon it got to the point where you were flying every day, and getting in and rent a car and then going to the next town, getting up in the morning, flying to the next town. And I remember talking to I think it was a Delta pilot, and I was telling him how much we flew. And he said, it's not healthy for humans to be in the plane, 20 days a month. He says, we don't even fly that much.
No.
They fly 3 or 4 hours a day, maybe 3 days a week. And we were flying every single day.
Yeah, they're regulated. They're regulated as pilots. They can only do so much. But
yeah, and Vince, he just didn't show any mercy, and he made a lot of money. And Hulk was the golden goose. Without Hulk, he couldn't have got it done. And he had a lot of the talent. He had all the great talent, it was sort of a relief. He fired me 3 different times. And it was sort of a relief each time, to leave that. And I was pretty much burnt out by the time I left. I think it was 94 was the last time I left, or last time he fired me. And, here I was, been in the business since I was 22. And Vince says, he said, Jim, he says, I have no worries about you. You'll land on your feet, and it's funny because wrestling doesn't prepare you for anything unless you work at a gym, a restaurant, or the airport. That's the only place that you have familiarity with. I mean, you're a salesman for yourself. So I wound up, luckily getting a job being a salesman with a company not too far from my house in St. Paul, where I sold, maintenance equipment, for 21 years. And thank God I got that because I didn't have enough money to retire. So, right. It was a blessing in disguise. And actually, it was also a blessing that I got Medicare because when I was 65, because I had all these surgeries. And, these surgeries run anywhere from, $40,000 to $60,000. And this coming week, I'm having what they call an ablation procedure. I have what they call atrial flutter, which your heart goes out of rhythm.
Yep.
And I've had it for 15 years, and I've had 3 cardioversions where they put the paddles to you and put your. So yesterday I went in for a physical. I was there for about 3 hours, and then they did a CT of my heart. So this coming Thursday, I go in at 6:00, and they go through the groin and the hip, and they go through it, and they zap your atrial area in your heart, and they put scar tissue there, and the procedure takes about 3 hours. So I'm going to be there next Thursday for probably 5 or 6 hours, and I thank God I have insurance because it costs $93,000. That's what the expense of that is, and I'll probably wind up paying about $1,500 out of my pocket, but I need to have it done. So it's, I've had a number of my friends had the same thing, and they said that probably 80% of them said it helped them, and they didn't have the atrial fib anymore. So I'm counting on.
My dad's had it done before too. Actually, he had multiple heart issues, but I've had a friend that had AFib, atrial fibrillation, and it. He had 3 ablations as well. But lucky up in Canada where it doesn't cost you anything.
Yes, that's a good thing about Canada. Yeah,
you just gotta wait sometimes a long time. That's the only downfall. Sometimes I always joke about. Sometimes I'd like to just pay for it so you can have it done tomorrow versus people waiting for months and months and months for a procedure that could save their life. So
I had to wait 3 months for this.
You did too,
3
eh?
months, yeah, because they only have a number of surgeons, and they book them out, and I'll just be glad when this is done, because I don't like the medication you take. You take a blood thinner, and you're taking a channel blocker and a beta blocker, and the combination of these three medications make you dizzy. So you're dizzy and lightheaded all day, and oh man, it's. But I feel very blessed that that's the least of my worries right now.
We talked a little bit before we started recording about Tony Candello when you worked with him and Don Kellis up in Winnipeg here for the WFWA, and there's a video on YouTube. I watched that the other day of you guys wrestling outside in Winnipeg.
Yes.
I believe it was outside the Pony Corral.
Yes,
Yeah.
I remember that.
You have any other good stories working with Tony, I guess, or up here in Canada? Winnipeg?
Oh God! Well, I enjoyed working with Don Callis because he was such a fan of wrestling, and he had good natural ability, and you could almost tell that he was going to be a good heel, and he did a good job working with the WWE, and then he's a prime heel with the AEW, and I talked to him. I talked to him on the phone a couple times, and I know he's married, and I think he has his child, and I think they live in Winnipeg. And now and then when he comes through town, he'll give me a call and he'll ask for a number. Like he wanted Rick Martel's number, and then I think he wanted Tito Santana's number, who lives in New Jersey also. So, it's always good to see. Even though he's changed his looks, with the bald head and everything, and he's got his little gimmick going with his little family, but he's done a good job, and it's always good to see that guys that that you worked with when they were young, do so well in this business. Because to be honest with you, Richard, it's not a very good business. It takes your youth, and you perform, and there's still no union, and you still have to pay for your taxes, and you have to pay for your expenses. A lot of the times they pay for the airfare, but you have to pay for the rent-a-car, your food, your beer, and your rent-a-car. So, and the motel. So it's just tough, and now I see a lot of the guys are making a better living, and the secret is not to make a good living. The secret is to save some of that good living so that you won't have to wrestle 30 years.
That's some good advice. I was just going to ask you what's some advice you'd give somebody who's just breaking into the business, or somebody who wants to, and I think that's as good as advice right there, is to save your money.
And another great advice I got from all the old timers was not only save your money, just save your money, because if you don't save it, nobody else will.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I guess I'll wrap things up here. Thank you very much for your time with me and for jumping on here. I know it took a little bit to coordinate with our schedules, but I appreciate it, and I'm thankful for your time.
Thank you, Richard. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. Thanks. Hi to all my people and friends and fans in Brantford and Winnipeg. Hopefully see you in November.